here today to speak on an item that is not on the agenda that would like to step forward? Any public comment before we get into that? The next item is approval of minutes for the meetings of January 25th, 26th, 28th, and February 1st. These have all been sent out to the committee, and I'm sure you've had a chance to review them. Any questions or corrections anyone wants to make before we accept them? Is there a motion to accept them? So all those. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the public hearing for warrant articles for the 2016 annual town meeting. And let me just take a minute to discuss kind of what we're all about here today. We talk a lot about the fact that the FinCom makes a report to the annual town meeting on our position on all the warrant articles. The committee's been reviewing them in earnest for the last, say, month and a half, meeting between 2 and 3 times a week. We've had public hearings on, we've had citizen article sponsors come before us, and we've had a lot of people come to speak to us about individual articles. But this is an opportunity for the entire public to come before us and speak on any article that they wish to. At the conclusion of that, we'll begin to take action on some of these articles, on all these articles. We've taken some action on a couple of those, but we'd always be using the input of the public hearing to make any adjustments that we felt were warranted. What we're going to do is just go through the warrant page by page. I will announce the article, and if anyone would like to step forward, they certainly can. Article 1, so everyone speaking to Article 1. Article 2, I'll just kind of go through Article 3, appropriations. Article 4, revolving accounts. Article 5, the reserve fund. Article 6, budget transfers. Article 7, compensation plans. Article 8 is the general fund operating budget. Article 9, the appropriation for health and human services. We just had a presentation from that committee last week. Article 10, general fund capital expenditures. And 11, enterprise fund operations. Before I continue to read through all of these, in the interest of everyone's time, is there someone who is here to speak about any particular article that they may want to come and speak to? Okay. Lee, would you like to come forward?
I should like to speak about 33 and 99.
Okay, all right. Others? Yes. The Marble Way?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I'll make sure so I'll keep those in mind as we go through the list. Thank you. Article 13, the budget transfers. Article 14, airport aviation and administration building project. Article 15, the appropriation for the school. Article 16, the acceptance of Mass General laws related to sewer betterment assessments. And Article 17, acceptance of general law sewer betterment deferral. And as part of the public hearing, I'm going to ask John, did you want to make your comments now in terms of those?
Article 18, perhaps? Yeah.
18, okay. And then Article 18, the sewer project, Nantucket Harbor Shimo plus infill parcels in town sewer district. Did you want to do that? And I'm going to step down. I've recused myself from this conversation. And Matt is going to pitch in for me. John, would you like to? We have another volunteer who would like to step in. Would you like to do that, Steve? Just run the meeting where we talk about these articles.
Sure.
Okay.
And then you'll be back.
And then I'll be back.
With the sewer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And John's going to kind of give an update on what went on last night.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we had made a presentation last night to the Board of Selectmen, and what I thought I would do is to give maybe perhaps a slightly condensed version of that, so that the Finance Committee can understand the sort of the legal parameters associated with financing sewer projects, and also some of the policy issues that are going to have to be addressed ultimately at town meeting. So one of the things I hope there's clarity on now is that when you assess sewer betterments for a particular project, because of the way the general laws are written, you have one of two methods that you can use. The first one is what's known as the uniform unit method, and that's essentially where you look at, you create a sewer unit based upon basically a single-family residence, and you apply the number of sewer units on a particular parcel, taking into consideration both whatever exists there today and what could exist based upon zoning. And then you take those total number of sewer units and you divide the project cost by the sewer units. Well, first, with the total project cost, you multiply that by the percentage of that cost that will be paid by sewer users, the rest being on the tax rate. And then you divide that number by the number of sewer units, and that tells you what the betterment's going to be for each property. So that's one method. And I will tell you that that method is by far really the accepted method of assessing betterments in Massachusetts. Rosemary was here last night from Woodard and Curran, and both she and I, based upon our experience, basically have never seen the other method that I'm going to talk about very briefly. It's always the uniform unit method. The second method, though, is basically frontage and area, or a combination. So you basically look at the area of a parcel, and you would determine what percentage of area that is in the entire district, and that's how you would calculate the betterment assessment. Now, I know at one point the sewer work group had talked about land value as the method, and technically you can't use land value, but you can use area. And the finance director has run the numbers again, and they're essentially equivalent, because the larger the parcel, the more valuable it is as a general proposition. The only difference was on that there was one very high betterment based upon land value. I think it was $450,000. If you use area, that actually goes up to around $600,000. So you're getting into the stratosphere there, and you have to be concerned because betterments have to be reasonable and proportional, and you can only assess a betterment that is equal to, not more than the increase in the value to the property of having the sewers installed in the first place. So the uniform unit method, the sewer unit method, is by far the most prevalent and accepted form of assessing betterments, and we think lead to the kind of results that are more defensible than if you used an area method. So the one issue, it's a big issue here in Nantucket that everyone has to understand, however, is that the law, and we had this confirmed this morning with the Department of Revenue. I wish I could have said it last night, but we didn't have the call back until this morning. But they have confirmed the advice we provided to the selectmen last night, which is you have to assess, when you use the uniform unit method, you must assess a parcel based upon both existing units and potential units. So here in Nantucket, you have a zoning bylaw that permits, as of right, secondary and under some circumstances, tertiary dwelling units. So if you have 2 units on your property now, your main dwelling and a secondary dwelling, those are both considered dwellings that have to be assessed some method, some percentage of a sewer unit. If you don't have that secondary dwelling today, because it is allowed as of right, it has to be counted as a potential unit. And of course, if your land is vacant, Or if it can be subdivided under current zoning, then those are additional sewer units that you have to assess. Okay? So beyond that, there's quite a bit of flexibility as to how you determine what a sewer unit is going to be. Some towns do it based upon up to a three-bedroom house. Up to three bedrooms is considered one unit. And then some towns assess a third of a unit for every bedroom thereafter. Some towns will go to, between 4 and 6 units would be a bedroom would be a second unit. You could do 4 bedrooms, and these are things that really the sewer commissioners determine. What town meeting determines is the percentage of project costs that will be assessed as a betterment and the method of assessment. Beyond that, it's up to the sewer commissioners to develop a policy on what will be that sewer unit, the single residential dwelling. Now, if there's commercial or retail or other kinds of development that will be served by sewers, then what you essentially do is you look to Title V, you determine the amount of flow that retail or commercial business has based upon the Title V information, and then you convert that to sewer equivalent units. So they get assessed as well, and there's a formula already established as to how you would determine how many units, for example, a drugstore would have. I don't think there's a lot of commercial property in the 2 areas that are going forward, but that's how you would do it if there was commercial property. So what we tried to do then is last night explain to the selectmen, emphasizing that this is really just a conceptual way to look at this. There's lots of different ways that they could approach this, but one conceptual way to look at this, just so that you'll see what the order of magnitude would result in. So if you take the SHMO, Nantucket Harbor SHMO project, there are 212 existing units, dwelling units, and there are 130 potential units. Now, I don't want anybody to have this number cast in stone, because the town staff is still examining this and double-checking the numbers and testing the assumptions and making sure that it's correct. So these could actually go up in terms of the number of sewer units. But for purposes of this discussion, the total of existing and potential units is 342. So you would then take your estimated project cost. And again, I want to emphasize that these are planning level numbers. There's been no design work. There hasn't been survey work. These are planning level estimates. But right now, the estimate is $29,000 for Nantucket Harbor. Excuse me. I wish it were $29,000. $29 million for Nantucket Harbor SHMO. So the selectmen have recommended a 60-40 split in terms of betterments, 40% on the tax rate, 60% to be paid by the individuals who will be served. So you multiply 29,000 times 60%, and you come up with roughly 17,400,000. You divide that number by the 342 existing and potential units, and you come up with a sewer unit cost of $51,000. So then staff, what we discussed last night was one approach would be charge a full sewer unit to the main dwelling, and then a half a sewer unit to that secondary or combination secondary tertiary dwelling unit, depending upon, the assumption being that, I'll get to that in just a second. So it would be 1.5 units for most properties, which would mean a $75,000 betterment. Okay? Now, the assumption there was the town would assess 1 unit, this is the main dwelling, 1 unit up to 4 bedrooms, and then up to 8 bedrooms would be a second full unit. So if you had an 8-bedroom house, main house, you would be charged 2 sewer units, or $100,000. If you had up to 4 bedrooms, you would be charged the $50,000. And then because of the potential, either an existing or a potential secondary unit, you would get charged 1/2 of a sewer unit for that. So it would be, for example, 1.5 units would be 75,000, which is what most individuals would pay in the Nantucket Harbor Shimo district. Now, if you had property because of wetlands or topography or whatever just isn't developable, you can't put that second unit on, then then you wouldn't be charged that additional half unit. But that's basically a parcel by parcel analysis that you would have to undertake. If you look at the plus parcels, there are 190 existing units and 88 potential. That's 278 total existing and potential units. The project cost is roughly $14 million. Times 60% is $8,400,000. Divided by the 278 units brings a sewer unit cost of approximately $30,000. So because most people, if they have that potential or an existing second unit, would be charged an additional half unit, that would be 1.5 times 30,000, which is essentially $45,000. So the bottom line is most people would be in plus would be assessed a betterment of 45,000, and most in Nantucket Harbor Shimo would be 75,000. So last night there was quite a bit of discussion among the selectmen, about the 60-40 split. And, so what we did is we ran the numbers assuming it was a 50-50 split. And again, these are just conceptual numbers. That would bring the Nantucket Harbor Shimo total betterment from 75,000 to 50,000. And it would bring the plus assessment from 45 down to 30,000. But so that's the range of numbers you're talking about. And there was some discussion last night. Suppose you brought it down even further. In other words, more on the tax rate. Obviously, the betterment numbers were changed, but there was a lot of discussion about the equities of that and whether or not that makes sense. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussion by the Board of Selectmen and I assume with the Finance Committee to determine what really is the fairest way to do this and makes the most sense economically for the town. So there are a lot of nuances here. There are a lot of other issues that we have to consider. One of which is, what happens if there's a large parcel of land owned by the land bank, for example. Now, the land bank is a governmental agency, so you don't assess governmental agencies. You wouldn't assess the federal government. You wouldn't assess state or town property, or an entity like the land bank. We're looking at what do you do with land that's held by a private nonprofit. Technically, they're subject to assessments. The question becomes, is it subject to a deed restriction, maybe a conservation restriction held perhaps by the town or another governmental agency? That's obviously going to affect whether or not those parcels can be assessed. So that work is still underway in terms of coming up with a final determination of the number of sewer units that the betterment can be applied to. So that's pretty much the summary. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
I have one. You mentioned there's a number of different ways you can calculate the total units.
Yes.
So how were these calculated, these totals, the 342 total existing and potential sewer units in the Shimo area? Was that with the 1 unit for up to 4 bedrooms and then a second unit for up to 8 bedrooms? Is that?
Not exactly. So the 212 existing units is every dwelling on a lot that currently exists in that district, including anyone who has a secondary dwelling already on their property. the 130 potential units includes properties that by right can put that second dwelling unit on, or large parcels that can either be vacant or large parcels that can be subdivided and a certain number of units placed on that property. So that's how we got to the 342. So that's going to be your denominator, I guess is the right word. When you're actually looking at how to assign a sewer unit to each one of those properties, then you get into the discussion of, is it a 3-bedroom house? Is it a 4-bedroom house? Is it a third of a bedroom unit beyond 3 or beyond 4? Or do you go up incrementally to the next level, 4 to 8 to 12, et cetera? But those would, not the recommendation, but when we ran the numbers, what we said was treat main, secondary, and tertiary dwellings for the main house. The main house would be 1 unit, and anything thereafter would, and the secondary unit would be a half. And same thing with potential parcels. 1 for the main, a half for the secondary unit.
But then when it comes time to assess a property, if they had an 8-bedroom house and they had a second dwelling, that
Yep.
person may, by your example of how you can calculate sewer units, that person may be assessed 2.5.
Actually, the way that would work is, so if the main house that exists is 8 bedrooms, that's, and if I misspoke, I apologize, that's 2 units. If there's either an existing or a potential secondary unit up to 4 bedrooms, that would be a half. So that would be 2.5.
So that's.
But if I'm sorry, just to complete the thought, if they could put up an 8-bedroom secondary unit, then they would be up to 3 units, 3 sewer units. So it would be 50,000 times 3.
So that's how we calculate the assessment that these people will be charged.
Correct.
The betterments. But that's not how we calculated the 342 total units. What I'm saying is, if we're only counting 1 sewer unit for every house and 1 for each cottage,
Right.
but then when we go to assess people, they could be more than 2 total, you could have more assessments than you have in your total of 342 units.
Yes, and I wish Brian were here, but the key here is you can't assess and collect more than the total project cost. But there are going to be, Brian was confident when we did the analysis yesterday that even with that constraint, it would be very unlikely that you would wind up assessing more than the 60% of the project cost, which is to be paid by betterments. And, he's still refining those numbers, but you could also go to a full sewer unit for that secondary dwelling. That is a possibility, but what we thought was, one of the thoughts we had was, well, how can we keep these sewer assessments within, I don't want to say within a reasonable level, but how can we make them as affordable as possible?
Sure.
But that's all subject to discussion and essentially a determination by the sewer commissioners.
Thank you. I didn't see whose hand was up first. John?
2 quick questions. A tertiary, if you've got a large enough lot so you could put 3 dwellings on it?
Yes.
How's the tertiary?
Well, the way we thought we would address that is you look at the number of bedrooms in the secondary unit, and you look at the number of bedrooms in the tertiary unit, and if it's 4 or less, that would be a half a unit. If the tertiary bedroom has 4, it's a half a unit. I'm sorry, if the secondary unit has 4, that's a half a unit. If the secondary has 2 and the tertiary has 2, that's still a half a unit.
Okay. What about 5 units?
That would be on the secondary dwelling, that would be a full sewer, one full sewer unit, a half plus a half.
Anything over 4, anything over 4.
Well, that's what we presented for discussion purposes, but as I said, you can change that. I mean, that's subject to debate and discussion.
That's what you're telling me.
Yeah, so 5 to 8 bedrooms would be considered, up to 8 would be considered 2 full units on the main house. Up to 8 on a secondary dwelling would be 1 full unit.
So to Stephen's point, what's key is establishing that 342 number of units. Is one of those units in the 342 a 4-bedroom or an 8? Because if it's an 8, there'd be 2 units in the 342.
Right.
It's that number that's the
Right.
key
It
number.
seems to me the numbers need to match, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if the 342 takes in consideration 4 bedrooms or 8 bedrooms. I wasn't sure if you.
It's, my understanding is it's all existing units.
Okay.
So if there's an 8, and I believe that's the case, if there's an 8-bedroom house that exists today, that's one of those dwelling units.
So today it's
But they
one.
could potentially be assessed 2
Correct.
units.
So we have
because
to
if
make
they-
sure that that is 2, not 1, when we get to dividing.
Correct. That's correct. That's correct.
Sorry, if I could just add on to the question, but the determination is really going to be by the Board of Health. I mean, that, all these policies about one for 4 bedrooms, 2 for up to 8 bedrooms.
That's the sewer
all those sort of-
commissioners.
That's the sewer commissioners.
Sewer commissioners, that's
And
correct.
that's done sort of at the beginning of the project as opposed to after the whole,
Yes,
I'm not asking the right way, but.
yes.
Well, one would assume that it's based on what the building department has as a floor plan for that house on number of bedrooms.
Yes, and the assessors, what their records show. So, and obviously, there are issues with people who have a den or a TV room or,
Cased opening versus a door
Yeah,
jam.
Now, this is not going to be a perfect science. It's not going to be perfect, but I think, there are ways that you can get pretty close. Well, always want to be fair, obviously, but I think, this is going to be a reasonable method. This is the typical way that a lot of towns do it, with some variations, admittedly, but this is typically the way it's done.
So John, I have a question. Let's assume this system is done and it's in 5 years, 10 years down the road, a subdivision comes in. Do they pay the betterment for that? How do they get charged?
Okay, so
What's already been
you
done?
have let's say you have a 10-acre parcel of land. What you have to do is analyze what is the potential number of sewer units based upon current zoning. And if you can put in a 10-lot subdivision, then that's 10 sewer units. And you are assessing 100% of the cost. Excuse me?
It's 20 sewer units, because each of those lots could have a house in it.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Well, it would be, if it's 1.5, it would be 15 units, that's correct. So the thing to keep in mind is what DOR says is you cannot assess a privilege fee after you've assessed a betterment on the same parcel for the same project. So in this scenario, you are assessing 60% of your project cost based upon potential. So that person who has the 10-acre parcel that could potentially put in 10 dwellings will be paying whatever it is, the 15 sewer units. However, and this is important, there is a provision in the general laws that says the Board of Sewer Commissioners may defer the payment of that betterment for basically undeveloped land until they're ready to connect, until they get a building permit, or a set period of years has expired, whichever is sooner. And that period of years would be determined by the sewer commissioners. So there is that method that you can use to delay, if you will, the payment of the betterment, but there's a hitch. There always is a hitch. The statute says during that period of deferral, the homeowner has to pay 4% of what was otherwise due on the betterment. And that's a requirement of state law. Now, okay, well, there's one other point I wanted to make, but let's see if there are any questions.
John, I just want to make sure I got this straight now. When you're talking about potential,
Yes.
it sounded to me like the assumption is that that's on a potential lot, that's a four-bedroom house,
Up to 4 bedrooms, yeah.
up to four bedrooms. You're not assuming anything beyond that. You're not assuming an eight-bedroom house on a potential.
Well, I don't know how you do that, to be honest
I
with you.
don't either, but I just
I think
wanted
that
to
would be
know how
too
you-
hard, that would be too hard to predict. And what we would recommend is, when you're looking at, let's say you can get another lot, you can do an A&R. You know, it seems to me you would assume it's a 4-bedroom house, unless you did some kind of a study in that area, and I don't know, the average house size, I don't know what that is. I think there are a lot of modestly sized houses in the Nantucket Harbor District, but there are some very large parcels as well. So you can't plan for the maximum number possible, it seems to me.
Yeah.
It's what is current zoning says you can put a dwelling unit, so,
Okay.
and a secondary unit. So the other point I wanted to make is, so I just put in a septic system and I spent $50,000, and it's a beautifully running system, and why do I have to pay a betterment? Well, because the law says you have to, and there really isn't a way to defer the payment of that betterment, but what the sewer commissioners, I'm sorry, this is a Board of Health issue. The Board of Health has a regulation, it's the mandatory sewer connection regulation. And it basically says, once the sewer comes down your street, unless there's some inability because of topography to connect, you have to connect to the sewer system. A betterment is charged whether you connect or not. So that Board of Health regulation could be amended to defer the application of the mandatory sewer connection for a period of years. So that homeowner could avoid incurring the costs of connection, not the betterment, but the costs of connection and the sewer use charges for that period of time.
Peter?
Question, John, relevant to the town property. So does that mean a town official building that doesn't have sewer, of course, is not charged a betterment? But what about a town-owned residential unit that does not have sewer, not open to the public? Would that unit be assessed?
When you say a town-owned residential,
If there's a residence that the town owns, or potential that the town may own,
Like lifeguard housing, you're thinking of, something like that.
anything that's owned by the town, it's a
well,
residential.
I'm not going to answer that question quite
Yeah.
on the spot, because, when you look at taxable property, for example, property owned by a nonprofit is not subject to real estate taxes. But if there's an activity going on that property that is unrelated to the charitable nature of the operation, then you can assess taxes. So I'd have to look at those specifics to give you an answer. But generally speaking, the way you deal with town-owned property is through the percentage to be paid by the taxpayer. That assumes not only everyone's getting a general benefit from clean water, but also everyone benefits from the public services that are provided in this building, in town hall. And so the cost of the project, or the impact of this building on the project is recouped through taxation, which everyone benefits from. That's the theory.
Further questions? No? Is there anybody in the audience who'd like to speak on this? No? Okay, then moving on to Article 19, changes to the sewer district map. And Article 20, welcome Jim back.
Thank you very much. Article 20 is the Waterways Improvement Fund. Article 21 is the Airport Aviation Fuel Revolving Fund. Article 22 is the Ambulance Reserve Fund. 23 is the county assessment. 24, the 2017 county budget. Article 25 rescinds unused borrowing authority, and 26, the ferry embarkation fee. 27 is other post-employment benefit trust funds, and Article 28 is the collective bargaining agreement for the laborers union. Articles 29 and 30 relate to the Community Preservation Committee. Anybody here to speak on those? Article 31 is a citizen article for Wisconsin Fire Department. Article 32 is a cost reimbursement. Was there somebody who wanted to speak on 32? No. Article 33 is coastal erosion liability waiver. Lee, yes. Yes, Lee. Okay.
Mr. Chair, where do you want me to?
Come sit right here.
Stand, sit.
Just
Yeah.
introduce yourself and.
Indeed. I know most of you, but for the record, I'm Lee Saperstein, and I'm here as a private citizen. In my career, I was concerned as an academic and a mining engineer on the safe and environmentally unimpactful extraction of natural resources from the earth. As a consequence, I became reasonably familiar with the Surface Mining Control Reclamation Act of 1977, and indeed authored some articles on managing the land use planning elements of that act. What does that have to do with Article 33, you might ask? In the 70s, there was a spate of environmental laws, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Power Plant Siting Act, and the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, and one that gets a little bit closer to us, and that's the Coastal Zone Management Act. Every one of those had the same language on areas of critical environmental concern where there was a section of the law that allowed, or that, allowed is a good enough word, the permitting agencies standing for the public to restrict activity in lands that might be considered an area of critical environmental concern. And there were three substantial ones: fragile and historic lands, renewable resource lands, and the one that affects us all here, and that's natural hazard lands, of which coastal banks is one. Okay, so at some point in looking at the impact of the passage of these, I came across a law in Pennsylvania that forbade the extraction of coal if the coal was needed to protect the surface. A lawsuit was initiated all the way to the Supreme Court, and through some convoluted reasoning, the Supreme Court said that was not a taking, contrary to the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. However, in North Carolina, the coastal zone, the state coastal zone management group banned activity on a barrier beach, and the Supreme Court said this was an uncompensated taking, and they might, that the state of North Carolina would have to go back and figure out whether or not there was compensation due to the landowners who had thought that they might build on this land but now couldn't. So my presentation here is because I'm concerned that the town be fully eye-open about potential legal issues that might arise from this sometime way in the future. By the way, Mr. Chair, I printed out some plans of shorefront property. Nantucket has a lot of shorefront property that is long and narrow, so that 200 feet from a shorefront property could easily put a piece of property 1,000 feet from the shore. There's one, these are prints out of the town's GIS. There's 45 Shell Street, which, according to that, who knows what it is, I didn't go visit, and I don't represent anybody. I'm just concerned about the best issues for the town. 45 shows as an empty piece of property. It's some 650 feet from the shore. If it were determined by the realtor or the assessor that this requirement to hold harmless and indemnify was to reduce the value of that property, I don't know, perhaps learned counsel knows, whether or not that would represent an uncompensated taking. But I think it's something that should be explored. Now, as I finish, let me say that notification of risk is a good thing. We're all for that. I don't know if you've ever visited a realtor in California, but there's a great big map on the wall that says these are where the faults are and these are the seismic risk zones you need to know before you purchase what you're getting. So the notification part's, I think, excellent. I'm concerned about the hold harmless and indemnification without some way of adjudicating disputes, appeals, and so forth. But the real issue that brought me here was sharing what I knew about uncompensated takings, if it were deemed to reduce the value of the property rate, and that's it.
If we leave, John, you want to make a comment on this?
Well,
Did you draft this, or?
oh, yes, we did, yes. So I think the way to look at the takings argument is that if someone were to object to having to sign the release and hold harmless agreement, they would have to argue, I think, that that requirement in the town bylaw constitutes what's known as a regulatory taking. So it's not an actual taking, but it's having a regulation in effect that rises to such a level that it constitutes a taking under the Constitution. Now, the case law in Massachusetts, generally speaking, is that in order for someone to prevail on a regulatory taking, you have to demonstrate that that person has been deprived all beneficial use of their property. We just had a takings case here in Nantucket on a Conservation Commission case. And, you know, I think it was a 4-day, it was a pretty extensive trial, but we prevailed on that because we were able to demonstrate that, in fact, the Conservation Commission regulation did not deprive the property of all economic beneficial use of the property. So in this instance, I would be hard-pressed to see how having this requirement would deprive people of the beneficial use of their property. Is there some other basis, Lee, to attack this? Maybe. This is, I think, based upon last year's discussion, this is pretty cutting edge. And I would certainly agree that whenever you start dealing with shorefront property and environmental hazardous zones, you have to be very careful about how you proceed. But by the same token, this only applies to building permits for basically people who are going to come in and put up their beautiful house, you know, 100 feet from the ocean. And
No, that's my point. It could be as much as 1,000 feet from the ocean.
based upon.
Shorefront property is defined as any parcel that includes the high water mark. And because Nantucket has long, narrow, for
I got
example,
you.
on Squam Road, they're 840 to 900 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
So that adjacent to the shorefront property, or within 200 feet
Of the high water mark,
of the
basically.
high
Yeah.
water mark,
I got you.
puts you at a quarter of a mile.
Got you.
Well, that's actually something I'm not clear about. It says within 200 feet of shorefront land. So could that be an abutting parcel that's within 200
Yes.
feet of a property that does touch the water? So this is not just for parcels that. in
It's
fact,
within
are-
200 feet, so there could be an intervening parcel.
I see.
That's why
No, but-
that's why I counted these.
Is it within 200 feet of a parcel that touches the water, or is it within 200 feet of the water?
Yeah, of the water, of the high water mark.
That's not what's written.
Well-
I'd interpret it differently, so it says within 200 feet of shorefront land.
And shorefront
And
land.
shorefront land is
Is
defined.
defined.
In zoning 139, I think it's 2, the definitions. It's any parcel that contains a high water mark. We've got some interesting stuff here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks for.
I'll see you later. 99.
All right. Anyone else to talk about the coastal erosion liability waiver? No. Article 34 is a zoning map change from residential commercial to commercial mid-island for a number of parcels which are listed. People looking for Marble Way haven't come across it yet. Article 35 is another zoning map change from residential commercial 2 to commercial mid-island. Article 36 is a zoning bylaw amendment. Article 37 is a zoning map change from residential commercial to C-Tech and R5 for Bartlett Road and Marble Way. And you would like to talk about Article 37? That's not the article you want to speak to? Okay, Article 38 is a zoning map change, Marble Way. Would you like to just come on down and Samantha, have a seat and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Sam Parsons. I live at 1 Marble Way, and I filed a citizens article to change the zoning. And I'm just here to see if anyone has any questions. I think I was here at the last meeting, kind of gave an overview of why we did it, and I guess I'm just here in case anyone has any questions.
Any questions of Ms. Rose? No? From anyone? No? Great, thank you for coming. Article 39 is another zoning map change, Fairground, Vincent Circle, and Tacoma Way. Article 40 is a zoning map change of R1 to residential Old Historic. Article 41 is another zoning map change in Quidnet. Article 42 is a bylaw amendment on the village residential swimming pool. Article 43 is a zoning map change for Crooked Lane, Grove Lane, and Nantucket Road. Anybody would like to comment on that? Article 44 is a zoning map change, again, from SR 20 to SR 5. Article 45 is a zoning map change for town open space. Article 46 is another zoning map change, country open space. Article 47, zoning map change for Hummock Pond Road. Article 48, zoning map change for Evergreen Way, Daffodil Lane, and Airport Road. Article 49, zoning map change, Massaquoi Avenue. Article 50, zoning map change, Boulevard, Okiwa, and Lovers Lane. Article 51, tertiary dwelling. Article 52, tiny house unit district. Anybody here to speak on that? Article 53, zoning bylaw amendment, tiny house village district. Article 54, secondary lots. Article 55, secondary lots, qualified family members. Article 56, secondary lots, qualified family member. 57, zoning bylaw amendment, major commercial development. Article 58, adult use, zoning bylaw amendment. Article 59, abandoned vehicles. Article 60, zoning bylaw amendment, miscellaneous technical changes. Article 61, bylaw amendment, obsolete building-related laws. Article 62, bylaw amendment, solid waste disposal. Article 63, conveyance of town property. 64, a bylaw amendment for personal watercraft flyboarding. It's a citizen article. We've had some testimony before. Article 65, the town of Nantucket right to farm. Again, a citizen article we've had lots of conversations about. Article 75, home rule petition, the merger of Nantucket Water Commission and the Sconset Water Commission. Anyone like to speak to that? Article 76, the airport fuel revolving fund.
This is
Oh,
10.
I'm sorry.
66.
Oh,
66.
flipping too quickly. Article 66, Board of Sewer Commissioners, Town Sewer District Map Changes. Article 67, Board of Commissioners, Sewer District Map Changes. And again, in Article 68, the same subject. Article 70, Nuisance Animals, the citizen warrant article. Article 71, Dog Licenses. Article 72, again, dog licenses. Article 73, Acceptance of Mass General Law related to abandoned motor vehicles. Article 74, Charter Amendment regarding publication of town meeting warrants. Now, Article 75, Merger of Nantucket Water Commission and Sconset Water Commission. Article 76, Airport Fuel Revolving Fund. 77, Community Preservation Committee. 78, Increasing Residential Property Exemption. 79, Conveyance of Properties from County to Town. Article 80, Real Estate Conveyance to Nantucket Land Bank and the Nantucket Conservation Land Trust. 81, Home Rule Petition. The following are all Home Rule petitions. Some have been filed in the past, and some are new. Article 81, Real Estate Conveyance from Nantucket Island Land Bank to Town of Nantucket. 82, Home Rule Petition on Community Housing and Sewer Funding. 83, Retired Officers to serve as Special Police Officers. 84, Land Bank Act Amendment. 85, Town Charter Amendment, Town Clerk. 86, Home Rule Petition Amendment to the Town of Nantucket Charter. 87, Real Estate Acquisition, Airport Property. 88, Real Estate Acquisition Conveyance in Tom Nevers Head. 89, Real Estate Acquisition, 42 Nobadir Avenue. Article 90, Lease of town land for renewable energy projects. 91, agreements, payment in lieu of taxes agreements for renewable energy facilities. Article 92, net metering credit purchase agreements. 93, long-term lease authorization, airport Delta property. 94, long-term lease authorization, 10 Sun Island Road. 95, real estate acquisition, Woodbine Street. 96, real estate disposition, Woodbine. 97, real estate acquisition, Poplar Street. And 898, disposition of same. 99, this is a real estate acquisition. Lee has a comment on for 40 and 42R Sparks Avenue and 42 and 44 Sparks Avenue. It's a citizen article. Welcome
I'm
back.
back again.
Welcome back.
For the record, I'm Lee Saperstein, and I am one of Nantucket's cemetery commissioners. I'd like to introduce one of our others. There are 5 of us, but Robert Gardner is also cemetery commissioner. At yesterday's regularly scheduled meeting of the Cemetery Commission, we voted to support Article 99, providing there was an important amendment on line 6. That amendment would be to include the words, "and for municipal cemetery purposes." It would follow behind the funeral home. Again, the printout of the land shows that these 4 parcels are at the edge of Newtown Cemetery, up against Nantucket Auto Body. 42R is a property that's accessed by Calpon Lane, and then 40, 42, and 44 are alongside Sparks Avenue. These are deemed to be town land, but the ownership and title is uncertain, so that taking would be a way of ensuring the title. And we're all for that.
And what was the language you'd like to see in here?
To include for municipal cemetery purposes on line 6, which would follow funeral home purposes. And the logic behind this is that it's an extension of the cemetery, or it's against the cemetery. And if it's not all needed, that is, the two lots are not all needed for the funeral home, then we'd like to be able, without having to come back to any of the authorities, to be able to extend the cemetery up to the edge of whatever is being used for the funeral home. Now, let us all be clear that funeral homes are an accepted use within the town code, and they are by right in the commercial downtown, commercial mid-island, and commercial neighborhood. In R10 and R20, they are special permit. And so, if a funeral home is to go in this area, additional paperwork would be needed with both the Zoning Board of Appeals, and because there are wetlands in both 40 and 42R, with the Conservation Commission. So, in the event that this becomes more complicated, then the uses as cemetery also would be a good use of the land. By the way, we don't know if there are any burials in those lands. We know that there are burials in 44. And the town will be working with a ground penetrating radar specialist to survey all of this, to make sure that we know where the limits of burials are. So, that's.
Before we leave, any questions?
That's
from-
fine.
Would you take questions from?
Oh,
the group?
absolutely.
Anybody have a question on that? All right, thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Article 99, I'm sorry, Article 100, real estate acquisition of Winoma Way. 101, a real estate disposition of same. Article 102 and 103 is an acquisition and disposition of Sakaha Avenue. Article 104 is municipal aggregation. Article 105 is the appropriation for capital projects stabilization fund. And the Article 6 is the appropriation for the stabilization fund. The final article is an appropriation for free cash. So we went over those pretty quickly. Is there anyone here who would like to make additional comments or comment on an article that went through? Seeing none, I'll make is there a motion to close the public hearing? Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, aye. Ayes, no. Okay, we'll return to our regular agenda now. And Eric is here. Were you going to, public hearing for, I'm sorry, let's go to Land Bank Act Amendment, Article 84. I think you were going to discuss that with us today. Come on up and review that with us. If we can all turn to Article 84 in the warrants. Welcome, Eric. Nice to see you.
Hello, Eric Sadetsky, the Director of Land Bank. This article is in response to the growing concerns over the affordable housing issue on the island, and Land Bank has several exemptions from the Land Bank fee, primarily one for first-time home buyers, but if somebody was looking to purchase an affordably covenanted home, but they weren't a first-time home buyer, they would have to pay a land bank fee. This article is an attempt to make those buyers buying covenanted affordable units exempt from the land bank fee, just to help buyers of affordable units getting an exemption to our act.
And this is the first time this has been before us, I believe.
Yes.
So this is have you, other communities with land banks, does this issue come up in terms of, just trying to think of the likelihood of approval?
I don't know that it exists at the St. Martha's Vineyard Land Bank, which is most comparable to us. I don't know if they have this, I don't believe they do have this amendment, or this exemption in their act.
Okay.
It's modeled after our first-time home buyer exemption, and was drafted by Land Bank Council, longtime Land Bank Council.
Okay, good.
So, Eric, have you calculated, is this a significant amount of money that might be forfeited from doing this?
No, it would be fairly minimal in the scheme of Land Bank's overall income.
stream, there's not a ton of affordable units, and the amount that's being exempted is fairly low, so it would not have a significant financial impact on Land Bank.
Anything else? from anybody? Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is a review of the 2016 annual town meeting articles, and that's really to kind of distribute, which we've done, and to discuss the worksheet that Brian and Linnell developed. I talked to Brian about having, and I believe town administration is going to be using this too, maybe to track some of their the worksheet that Brian and Linnell developed. Brian mentioned you're going to be using this to keep track of the warrant articles. Okay. So what he's done is these are color coded. So I guess the salmon colored are articles that we deferred because we are awaiting additional information. And then the articles in blue are articles where we've taken action. And again, in light of public hearing, I guess maybe just to ask the general comment, were there any other articles in blue that if you all just take a quick look at them on both pages? Are there any? Is there any testimony or from the public hearing that would cause you to want to bring one of these up for further discussion? So that's Articles 29 to 32, 34, 35, 39 to 48, and listed down below. So I think we've had. Oh, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for Articles 88, 95, 96 on your sheet.
88, yeah.
I believe those should be motion to adopt, and the comment was to support the Real Estate Advisory Committee. It's not those aren't planning board articles. The Real Estate Advisory Committee had advised you on those.
Right.
Just to clarify. that those aren't
But
planning
don't we usually our real estate articles just come right from the finance committee? So it could be a motion to adopt.
I'm just responding to you've got a note there about a comment.
No, I know, we need to delete that.
Okay.
That's great, yeah. So it would be, so we would need to change so this is 88, 95 and 96. We'll have to look at the minutes to see what action we took. Linnell, we can do that offline. And then would you bring it back to us if we needed to change the motion? Great, thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Anybody see any of the other shaded areas that we can? What I've done is, last time we talked about the fact that we would kind of go through article by article. But we need to define, and I sent an email out earlier today, we need to define the articles that we're going to be discussing at the next two meetings. And so I took the liberty of, and Linnell has that, do you have the articles that are on the agenda for Tuesday and Thursday? Okay.
Tuesday, 1 through 15.
I'm sorry, what?
Tuesday, Articles 1 through 15.
Okay.
20 to 28. Article 33.
Yep.
61 through 64. And 66.
And I think I put the balance of the articles on the Thursday meeting.
73 through 84.
Right.
87. 90 through 94. And 104 through 107.
Now, we could, as I said in my email, we can amend those agendas, but they needed to be out by 2 today. So is that, everybody, is it all right if we do it that way, or is there another recommendation? That's good. Okay. And Libby, so you'll bring, you'll let us know Monday on the items that, on the articles, on the money articles that, where you have the,
Well, we're not gonna be here Monday, but.
I'm sorry, Tuesday.
Brian and I are working on them now, and neither of us is here this weekend, so it's gonna be.
Oh, okay.
Rushed, but-
Okay, all right. Anything else for the committee under the agenda item review of annual town meeting articles? All right, let's just talk about the date of our next meeting. The next two, we have meetings next Tuesday and next Thursday. And I just want to add one thing, and Libby sent me an email, and Libby and I had spoken about having some staff recommendations and staff summaries on the sewer projects. But I'll let you be the judge. I thought John did an excellent job of summarizing those. And Libby and my other question to Libby was, what was the process and the timeline for the Board of Selectmen to take draw some conclusions to these matters? And I think what I heard John say, that there were really the new information about sewer units and those kinds of things. So the two things are at town meeting are and maybe you can summarize those two things that need to be addressed at town meeting.
The percentage of project costs to be assessed as betterments,
Okay.
and the method of assessment.
Okay. Libby suggested to bring up to the chairman and vice chair of the Board of Selectmen and to me whether we might want to have a joint meeting of the board and the finance committee. I was concerned that we hadn't kind of solidified all the different options, but seeing that we have, I'd certainly be amenable to that. What do you all think?
I think it might make some sense. I mean, I watched part of the selectmen meeting last night online, and my sense was that while they voted for the 60-40 split, there was quite a bit of debate about whether that was the right proportion, and I know that, Bob DeCosta mentioned a 25-75 split, and there was a lot of debate and discussion about it. And it seemed to me that given that we have kind of interlinked responsibilities for the town meeting, and coming up with this number might be worthwhile.
Other thoughts?
I agree. I think there's some value to it. We should pursue that.
Good. That's okay. So Libby, kind of take back what I said earlier. I think so. Let's proceed and suggest, and I'll follow up with an email to Bob and to Matt too, that we might want to sit down. The suggested date might be the 29th.
I just thought that would be as soon as possible.
Okay. But anyway, so we'll fit that into their schedule on ours. Is there anything else to come before the committee today? Is there a motion to? Yes.
You just said the 29th. Is that a definite, or is that just a?
That was a suggestion from Libby, and she will bring it up at her, I guess, agenda meeting with the chairman and vice chair. But you might want to.
We have a meeting scheduled that day anyhow. So this
Right.
will
I
just
think
take
that was
place.
she was accommodating, our schedules since we've got so. If that's doable, I think that would be great.
I just picked it because I don't think we're gonna get to it next week.
Right. And then there's school
And then it's the
vacation.
break, and then it's the Monday following.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. All those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Thank you.
Is there a way? See
Yeah.
Win with somebody with